In the hot summer of 1982, a group of archaeologists in Florida made a discovery that stunned the world. While digging in the Windover Bog near Titusville, they found an ancient burial site that turned out to be older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. Among the hundreds of skeletons buried in the swampy ground, one skull shocked them the most. Inside it was something no one expected to see after thousands of years. A human brain, still preserved when it should have rotted away long ago. Scientists thought this discovery would help them understand how early humans migrated across the continent. Instead, what they uncovered raised strange and frightening questions. It all began as an ordinary day at a construction site. A worker named Steve Vanderjagt was using a backhoe to dig out a retention pond for a new housing project. The job seemed routine until his machine hit something hard under the soft, wet soil. Thinking it was just a rock, which was unusual in Florida's sandy ground, he stopped to check. When he dug it out by hand, he froze. It wasn't a rock at all. It was a human skull, stained dark brown from centuries underground. Even in the heavy summer heat, the bone felt strangely cold. Steve described feeling an eerie chill, as if he had disturbed something that was meant to stay buried. Shaken, he set the skull down and called his supervisor, who quickly stopped all construction. Police arrived, believing it could be a crime scene. At first, officers thought they might be looking at a modern murder. After all, the swampy woods around Titusville had long been linked to strange disappearances and local rumors. But when the county coroner examined the skull, he realized it didn't look recent. The bone was soft, darkened by the bog, and crumbled at the edges when touched. As excavation began, more skeletons were uncovered, dozens of them, all buried in the same layer of peat. Some were perfectly positioned, as if the bodies had been carefully laid to rest. Others were scattered, but none of them showed signs of violence. By the time nearly 160 skeletons were recovered, it was clear this was not a crime scene. It was something far older, something ancient. Law enforcement brought in experts from Florida State University to investigate. The case soon reached Dr. Glenn Doran, a young anthropologist who specialized in ancient human remains. At first, he wasn't impressed. To him, it looked like nothing more than a murky pond in the middle of nowhere. But as he and his team began digging carefully, layer by layer, they realized just how extraordinary the discovery was. The skeletons were incredibly well preserved, unlike anything found in Florida before. Incredibly, some still had pieces of soft tissue clinging to the bone, and a few skulls even held fragments of preserved brains. This discovery was beyond anything the scientists had imagined. What should have been nothing but bone had somehow survived thousands of years in the bog. It opened the door to secrets about ancient people who had once lived in Florida, but instead of simple answers, it left researchers with haunting questions about who these people were, how they lived, and why their remains had been preserved so perfectly. The discovery at Windover Bog left scientists both amazed and confused. The preservation of the skulls and bones didn't make sense, especially in Florida's hot, humid climate where organic material usually rots quickly. How could these remains have survived so perfectly for thousands of years? No one had answers at first. But what would soon be found inside some of the skulls was even more shocking and hard to believe, something that science itself struggled to explain. As word spread about the site, curiosity grew far beyond the world of archaeology. At first, it was only scientists and researchers who took interest. But soon, paranormal investigators, conspiracy theorists, and online communities began spinning their own stories. More than 160 bodies had been uncovered in one small pond, and many of them looked as if they had been preserved on purpose. Some skeletons were positioned carefully in fetal poses, while others lay stretched flat. There were no wounds, no signs of violence, and the bones showed almost no decay. To the locals, it looked as if these people had been gently laid in the water and left to rest peacefully for eternity. Rumors quickly spread through town. Some said the swamp was haunted. Others whispered that Native American spirits were protecting the burial ground. But the wildest theories came from people online. A few claimed the site was proof of alien technology, suggesting the bodies were preserved using methods like cryogenics. Others went even further, insisting the remains weren't human at all, pointing to blurry photos that made some skulls look oddly shaped. Terms like Nephilim, Atlantis, and lost civilizations began circulating, while some tied the site to the nearby Kennedy Space Center, saying it was all part of a government experiment in space, biology, or even time travel. None of these claims had evidence, but that didn't stop the stories from spreading everywhere. Meanwhile, the archaeologists kept working quietly, ignoring the noise and focusing on the evidence in front of them. Their first challenge was huge: how to excavate an ancient cemetery that was completely underwater. Any mistake could destroy remains that had been preserved for thousands of years. The team created an ambitious solution. They placed 150 well points around the pond and slowly drained the water with giant pumps, removing over 700 gallons every minute, non-stop for weeks. As the peat sank and the ground was exposed, the secrets of Windover Bog began to reveal themselves. What they found rewrote history. Radiocarbon dating showed the site was between 7,000 and 8,000 years old, making it one of the oldest burial grounds ever discovered in North America. Until then, experts had believed that humans in the Americas at that time were simple nomadic hunters with no permanent settlements. But the Windover burials proved otherwise. These people had been part of a developed, organized community. Many of the bodies were wrapped in hand-woven fabric shrouds. Some were buried with antler tools, shell jewelry, or woven bags. These artifacts showed careful planning, advanced craftsmanship, and cultural traditions far more complex than scientists had expected. Even more remarkable, the fabric shrouds turned out to be the oldest woven textiles ever found in the Western Hemisphere. Dr. James Adavajo, a textile expert, confirmed their authenticity and called the discovery extraordinary. He said holding the ancient cloth in his hands was like touching history itself, something that had survived thousands of years against all odds. Being able to hold such a delicate piece of history in their hands was an overwhelming experience for the scientists. When they first uncovered the fragile remains, they never imagined they would survive in such good condition. The discovery challenged everything experts believed about the technology and skills of early Americans. What stood out even more was the emotional detail in the burials. Infants were wrapped in carefully made garments, clearly crafted for ceremonial purposes. This showed that these people did not simply discard their dead, they honored them with rituals and deep respect. Over centuries, they returned to the same sacred place again and again, laying loved ones to rest. This was no random burial site. It was a space that held powerful meaning for them. Scientific testing of the bones revealed further details about their lives. Their diet consisted mainly of land animals and plants rather than seafood, which was unexpected in Florida's environment. Some skeletons also provided evidence of long-term medical care. For example, one teenager with spina bifida had lived for many years, which meant the community cared for him instead of abandoning him. These findings proved that this was a society that supported and protected its people, even the weak and vulnerable. They lived together as a close-knit group, had traditions, and cared deeply about one another. But the most astonishing discoveries were still to come. Inside some of the skulls, scientists uncovered something they never thought they would find: remnants of human brain tissue that had survived for nearly 8,000 years. This was unheard of in archaeology. Nearly 90 skulls contained preserved brains, something no one believed possible. The details were both fascinating and haunting. Children were buried alongside the elderly, each laid to rest with the same careful respect. Some people had died from infections or starvation. One woman had a tumor in her pelvic bone, which turned out to be the oldest tumor ever found in the Americas. These findings didn't just reveal how people died, but also how they lived, together, in a community where compassion and responsibility were shared. One of the most moving discoveries was that of an infant buried in a finely woven shroud. Next to the tiny body was a pouch filled with seeds, a symbolic gesture that suggested ritual and meaning. The cloth was made from plant fibers like Spanish moss and palm, woven in such advanced patterns that modern weavers had to be consulted to understand how they were made. Alongside these were tools crafted from bone, antlers, and shells, some purely decorative, showing that these people valued beauty as well as practicality. DNA analysis from bone marrow added another layer to the story. Many of those buried at Windover were related, allowing scientists to map out ancient family ties and kinship structures for the first time. This showed that the burial ground was not just for random individuals, but for a community of people connected by blood and shared history. Then came the most shocking find of all. During the 6th week of excavation, archaeologists uncovered a skull in astonishing condition. When it was examined in the lab, they found something that stunned the entire team, a brain that was almost completely intact. Though darkened and shrunken, the folds and structure were clearly visible, as if time itself had preserved it. Even parts of the protective membrane were still attached. This kind of preservation should have been impossible, yet it was undeniable. The skull belonged to a woman who had died at about 45 years old. Her bones told the story of her life. Arthritic changes in her hands and spine suggested years of physical labor. Her teeth showed the wear of a harsh diet, and signs on her skeleton revealed she had endured multiple childbirths. She had worked hard, raised a family, and lived a full life before being carefully laid to rest in the bog thousands of years ago. She had clearly lived a long and difficult life, yet her bones suggested strength, resilience, and perhaps even respect within her community. But the greatest mystery was not in her skeleton, it was in her brain. Against all odds, her brain tissue had survived for thousands of years, and when scientists studied it, they found details that changed everything. Years after the excavation, DNA samples were taken from both her brain tissue and her bone marrow. Normally, ancient American remains belong to one of 5 well-documented mitochondrial haplogroups, A, B, C, D, or X. But this woman's DNA showed something different. It carried a rare variant that did not match the dominant types found in the Americas at the time. Even more unsettling, 2 other individuals at Windover were later found to share the same rare marker, even though they were buried in different areas and were not related to her or to each other. This meant it wasn't just a family anomaly. It suggested something far bigger, the presence of a genetic lineage that once existed in North America but later disappeared. Some researchers quietly admitted how disturbing this was. One called the results biologically anomalous. Another said, "This isn't just rare. It's like something left a footprint and then vanished." The mystery deepened when scientists studied the structure of her preserved brain. They noticed subtle differences. Her frontal lobes were slightly larger than expected, and the symmetry between the 2 hemispheres was unusual. These variations weren't enough to suggest a disease, but they didn't fit neatly into what scientists considered normal either. No one could agree on the explanation. Were these traits shaped by her environment? Were they genetic? Or were they something else entirely? One of the lead researchers later admitted that when he first examined her brain, he had one overwhelming thought: this brain shouldn't be here. This is impossible. Her skull became the most talked about artifact from Windover, not just because of what it revealed, but because of what it seemed to demand. It was more than evidence. It was a message from the past, a reminder that not everything in history can be explained away. The Windover Bog discovery remains one of the most unsettling archaeological puzzles of modern science. At its core lies one burning question: how could so many brains, thousands of years old, survive in Florida's swamps? Scientists know the bog's unique conditions helped preserve the bodies. The oxygen-deprived water slowed decay, and tannins in the peat acted like a natural antiseptic, essentially pickling the remains. But even with this explanation, the preservation was far beyond what anyone thought possible. The folds of the brain, the membranes, and even subtle structures had survived almost perfectly. But what troubled scientists most wasn't just the preservation, it was the DNA. The unusual genetic marker found in 3 individuals raised possibilities no one was prepared for. Could it mean there was once a population group in North America that we've never fully documented? Did an entire lineage vanish without leaving a trace in modern DNA? If so, what does that mean for our understanding of human migration and history? These findings challenge long-accepted models of how and when people first came to the Americas. They suggest that early populations were far more diverse than we once thought, and that entire groups may have disappeared without leaving a record. Even the slight anomalies in the preserved brain, like the enlarged frontal lobes, sparked debates. Were they simply natural variations, or were they traits from an ancient subgroup of humans that no longer exists? The Windover site continues to leave scientists uneasy. Dozens of carefully buried individuals, many of them children wrapped in woven shrouds, suggest a society that valued ritual, care, and memory. Yet their identity, their language, and their ultimate fate remain unknown. Windover did more than preserve the dead. It exposed how much we don't know about the past. It forced researchers to confront the possibility that our history is incomplete, and that there are chapters missing from the human story. Deep in the Florida swamp, the Windover Bog still whispers a reminder. History is hiding secrets, and some are not ready to stay buried.